Dis goed om vir julle almal hier te hê. It's very good to have everybody here this morning. I'm sure there will still be more people popping in, but this is a very special occasion, and our honored guest is Dr. Boesak himself. So we want to welcome you all. We want to thank you that you have made this morning available to come and share this moment with us. This is the beginning of our weekend. Tomorrow we will have a full-on service with the Holy Communion as well. There are a few people that was requested to come, but I'm going to leave welcoming them as we go down our list so that we can ensure that we acknowledge them properly. Okay, brothers and sisters, part of our tradition in the 70s was to have a small little afro. Toe almal van ons het in die 70 jare afro's gedra, brilletjies gedra en ons skoon geskeer. En toe word ons nou geblameer, ons lyk soos Dr. Boesak. Toe het 'n paar van ons baard gaan dra. En tot nou toe dra ek nog altyd baard. Ergens op 'n stadium toe begin jy ook baard dra. Ek weet nie hoekom nie, but you will explain that to us. He managed to keep his hair, not his afro, he kept his hair. Some of us lost our hair in places, and so we wear berets still. But welcome. This is an easy morning. This is not a tough, difficult situation. It is a moment where we share with one another our personal experiences, our relationship with Dr. Boesak, and at the end of it, he will respond, because you will probably know everybody that's talking, and then Dr. Boesak will respond. So the program that you have is really an informal program to just give us a flow of the way in which we're going to be talking. And then I've got my wonderful sister, a colleague, and another friend of ours, Jackie, Belinda, and Zendo. And they will be, in between, they will be playing music of the 70s and music of the 80s. Was julle nie getooi-tooi het en saamgesing het, ek gaan julle nou leer om te sing. Tussenin gaan ons ook maar, dink ek, 'n koortjie of twee ook met mekaar saam sing, né? So baie welkom, wees gerus, wees gemaklik. Agter in die saal is daar 'n pragtige uitstalling. There's a beautiful exhibition of pictures of Dr. Boesak in different periods of his life. So I want to invite you to please go and walk through the hall later on in the morning. So halfway through our program, we will have a cup of tea, something to drink, and then at the end of the program, we can also have a snack with one another and just kind of reconnect to the past. But remember, reconnecting to the past, I think, is not light. Reconnecting to the past is a story that we remember how we try to figure out and make sense of life in circumstances that was absolutely ridiculous. In our tradition, the tradition where Dr. Boesak comes from, and a key player in the early 70s, they started the Beledende Kring. It was in the 74, was it? Somewhere there. A lead figure in the Beledende Kring. In 1977, the Beledende Kring played a remarkable role when the Christian Institute was banned. They took over and they produced the Dunamis as a document that was published over the years after that. In 1979 already, also under his leadership and together with others, and there's some of us that are children of parents who were part of the Beledende Kring. In 1979 already, they wrote the first, the simple outline of the Confession of Bellagh. The essence of Bellagh Confession was already captured in 1979. A Boesak was formed, and many other ecumenical movements, both within the Reformed tradition and across the church traditions, were formed in the 70s and in the 80s. So when we meet this morning, that is one part of your life that we're going to be celebrating with you. Because God was merciful to be able to call a man like Dr. Boesak to journey with us, to walk alongside us. And sometimes when we didn't take pulpits and podiums, he was standing there. I remember the Anglicans moet maar nou fyn luister, want hulle het mos Archbishopstraat. Nou as die manne aan die Anglican kerk so 'n bietjie skief trek en op Pieter Presents en Bibby, hulle gaan die storie vertel van hulle eie verhale, maar as die Anglican kerk se ouens skief trek, dan gaan hulle na die Arch toe, dan sê die Arch, okay, you can go to America and you can go this way. But when the Reformed brothers and sisters had to take a position against apartheid, you stood on your own. And we thank you for that exemplary way of teaching and leading us. But if it was only the church, then, yeah. But it wasn't the church. It wasn't the church only in South Africa and on the continent and across the world and within the family of Reformed churches. It was the church across the world globally where our brother took the lead and gave direction. And we thank God that the child from us in our midst was able to stand and talk to princes and kings and talk to whoever was there, but also walk alongside us. A kind uit ons midde. And therefore, we, like Frans Fanon says, when oppressed look at oppressed, they almost kind of measure them and say, oh, we look the same. And so we can begin to reject and negate one another. I'm just kind of thumb sucking what he's saying in a much more profound way. But in our midst we have a prophet. In our midst we have a priest. In our midst, we also have a pastor that could walk alongside us. And when we cried, he was there. And when we were down and oppressed, he was there. And when we were suffering, he was there. And when he had to walk with the Brain family, and they are all here this morning, they're all here, and I love them to bits. He was there with you and with all the students. When the students needed you, you were there. When the church needed you, you were there. Somehow, we lost understanding how important your being there was for all of us. But if it only was the church, dan kan ons maar sê, is net 'n kind van die Here wat in die kerk gewerk het. But he was more than that. Because he was called by God, ordained by God, blessed by God, and sent by God, the church was one space and area of struggle. The globe was your space and still is the space where you walk, where you talk, where you witness to the truth, and where you witness to the importance of justice and the importance of life in its completeness. But what you also do, you witness, en ek wil dit in Afrikaans sê, die omvangrykheid van die liefde. Die liefde is nie goedkoop nie. Love is not cheap. And so when you lived and you walked and you witnessed and you spoke, you did it out of love, because God is love. So this morning, we welcome you. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for your testimony, and we thank you that we can celebrate with you. I think two moments that I leave with you, and I think a lot of other people will talk about it. 1982, it was the acceptance of the state of confession that led to the Belhar. Not 1986, but 1982 was a moment when the church stood and said, here we stand and we will not be moved. And then in 1983, one of the most marvelous, almost ridiculous, but yes, indeed, one of the most extremely dangerous things took place. An entire nation rose up, and you gave us some direction, and you actually called for the United Democratic Front. Can you believe that? This man. And we're not doing praise singing this morning. I don't do praise singing. I refuse to praise. I celebrate and praise God. But I thank God for you, His messenger. I thank God for you, the man that was willing to stand up and say, I am willing to do what you call me to do. And so this morning, that is what we do, is to together with you say thank you to God. But we do it in an easy way this morning, in the way in which we used to do it on the streets, in the way in which we used to do it in the church, in the way in which we used to do it in the big auditoriums, and in the way that we do it this morning, just gathering together and saying, Amandla. So broer van Roy, waar is broer van Roy? Hy is oor 80, ek gaan vir broer van Roy vra om vir ons te open in gebed asseblief. Broer van Roy. So dit is nou jou counterpart, your age.
Goeiemôre broers en susters. Ek groet u in die wonderlike naam van ons Heer en Meester, wat die eerste en die laaste, die begin en die einde is van alles. Al die lof en al die eer kom die Here toe. Kom ons buig net die hoofde, dan bid ons saam. Onze getroue, onveranderlike hemelse God en Vader, Here, ons sê vir u baie dankie vir hierdie geleentheid waaraan ons vanmôre deel kon hê. Here, by hierdie geskiedkundige geleentheid wat ons het vanmôre, ook wat ons hier het vir Dr. Boesak vanmôre, saam met ons, dit is 'n genade voorreg wat ons het. Here, die woord sê vir ons, ons moet bly wees met die wat bly is. En ons het ook treur met die wat treur. Here, ons is vanmôre bly dat ons ook saam met hom sy 80ste verjaardag kon vier, nog 'n jaar by sy lewe. Here, baie dankie vir hom as persoon wat u oor die jare gebruik het en dat diep spore getrap het, besonder veel gedoen het, ook in die land, Here, leiersposisies wat hy beklee het, leiding wat hy gegee het, hy het vele gedoen. Dankie, Here, ook vir sy aandeel en alles wat u vir hom geroep het, dat hy ook vir hom daar die gawe gegee het om dit alles te kan doen. Is ons net innig dankbaar, Here. Wil u gee dat u hom verder sal lei, begelei, ook op die pad vorentoe, sodat hy nog meer en meer kan doen en kan uitleef dit waarna hy streef, Here. Ons wil vanmôre kom bid, Here, dat hy alles sal seën wat vanmôre hier gedoen sal word. Elke inset wat vanmôre hier gelewer sal word, dat dit die seën mag wegdra. En wil ek gee, Here, dat hierdie samesyn al hier, hierdie besondere geleentheid, ook vanmôre vir ons tot seën sal wees. Ons bid ook vanmôre, Here, ook vir die diens wat môre ook hier sal plaasvind. Seën dit alles, Here. As ons dit bid in daardie wonderlike naam van die Here Jesus Christus en met vele dankzegging. Amen.
Brothers and sisters, just a short reading, and then I'm going to invite our colleague Reverend Case to introduce the theme for the day. A short reading this morning comes from, en het komt uit Mattheüs hoofstuk 25, en die 31ste vers. Wanneer die seun van die mens in sy heerlikheid kom, en al sy engele saam met hom, sal hy op sy koninklike troon gaan sit. En al die nasies sal voor hom by mekaar gebring word. En hy sal hulle van mekaar skei soos 'n skaapwagter die skape van die bokke skei. En hy sal die skape aan sy regterkant laat staan en die bokke aan sy linkerkant. Daarop sal die koning vir die aan sy regterkant sê, kom julle, want my Vader het julle geseën, kom ontvang julle erfenis, die koninkryk wat my Vader reeds van voor die begin van die wêreld al vir julle gereed gemaak het. Want toe ek honger was, het julle vir my kos gegee, en toe ek dors was, het julle vir my iets gegee om te drink. En toe ek haweloos 'n vreemdeling was, het julle my in julle huise ontvang. En toe ek niks gehad het nie, om aan te trek nie, het julle my klere gegee. En toe ek siek was, het julle na my omgesien. En toe ek in die tronk was, het julle my opgesoek. En daarop sal die wat God se wil uitgevoer het om antwoord, maar wanneer het ons dit alles gedoen? En dit is nou 'n lang stuk, en dan sal die koning vir die, en dan sal hy vir hulle sê, ek verseker julle, as julle iets hiervan vir een van my broers of susters gedoen het, selfs al was dit vir my, vir die heel eenvoudigste onder hulle, het julle dit vir my gedoen. I can't find a better description. And when we talk about the kingdom of God, not only somewhere up there, but present here, then we say, you are one of those that were with the weakest and the smallest and the outcast. And we praise God this morning for that. En nou my laaste woord, en dan nooi ek vir my vriend op om die tema aan te lei. Maandag het jy dit gesê, Dok. Jy het gesê, if I can't preach it, I can't write it. I wanted you to also add, if I can't do it, I will not preach it, and I will not write it. You did it. You preached it. You did it, and you wrote it. Praise God. So to everybody that's here, and he's biskoppe, and he is predikante, en hy is dosente, en hy is ons. Ons is allemaal net ons. En aan allemaal van julle, wees welkom. Daniel, wil jy die inleiding kom doen asseblief?
Dr. Alan Boesak and Dr. Elna Boesak, brothers and sisters, good morning.
Good morning.
I will make introductory remarks on the theme, Alan Boesak, a turbulent priest for a turbulent time. And as the Reverend Marco said, when we planned this session today, we said that this must be an occasion of reminiscing and an occasion of remembering and recollecting. I think all of us have our own peculiar stories about Dr. Boesak, where we met him, and so on. I met you in 1977 in high school as in matric. You will not remember what I will remember. You came to Worcester to Minnie Hofmeyr College to make a speech on a Sunday afternoon. And I was in boarding school, so I had to ask the authorities to get out of the boarding school earlier to go to listen to you. Then in November 1980, I was ordained together with other theology students as your first student council working on the campuses of UWC, the Belleville College, and what is today known as Peninsula University of Technology. And in 1988, you appointed me as your first personal assistant at the South African office of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. And in 1989, you ordained me as one of the 4 ministers in the Belleville congregation, becoming one of your associate ministers in the congregation. I am part of a generation of ministers who have benefited as theology students in the 1980s and later as ministers immensely from your theological insights and your guidance and mentoring in the understanding and interpreting of the Bible differently in terms of context of life, especially within the apartheid experience. For that, my peers and I owe you an immeasurable debt. When I look at Alan Boesak's engagement with the powers that be, it reminds me of the relationship between Archbishop Thomas Becket and King Henry II. Archbishop of Canterbury from 1162 to 1170 struggled with King Henry, who reigned from 1154 till 1189, over the conflicting claims of church and state in England. Becket had been nominated by Henry, who hoped to make good the Crown's superior rights over those of the church. From being the King's dutiful minister, Becket became the uncompromising champion of the church. And a conflict between the Archbishop and the King ensued, which resulted in Becket being driven into exile to France. A truce was finally reached, and Becket returned to Canterbury. But immediately upon the Archbishop's return, he excommunicated several bishops who had supported the King. And the King, in turn, violently criticized Becket. And at some point, King Henry uttered in frustration at Becket's actions the words, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" The king's frustration was heard, and 4 royal knights, impelled by the king's anger, appeared at Canterbury on the 29th of December 1170 and murdered the archbishop at his altar. Dr. Boesak was indeed a turbulent priest. He turned things upside down. He asked difficult and easy questions. He saw things very differently. After his studies in Kampen, he returned to South Africa with a new and fresh insight in theology and the church and the oppressive situation in South Africa. He took a decisive stance, which was systematically spelled out in his doctoral thesis, Farewell to Innocence, a socio-ethical study of black theology and black power. And according to Boesak, Christians should be engaged in historical action. They should, to the best of their ability, be doing the will of God, that is, liberating the oppressed. What Christians do can only make sense within the framework of God's liberating deeds for those who look to Him for their liberation. In his approach to a situational ethic of liberation, Boesak argues the content of a Christian ethic is liberation. The first objective must be the identification of the human situation. Unless one knows one is oppressed, unless one knows the oppressor, one cannot be liberated, unquote. He further contends within the black situation, the solidarity with the oppressed becomes active engagement for liberation. leading to the transformation of oppressing and inhuman structures. When he returned in 1976. He walked into the middle of a decisive moment in the South African liberation struggle, the Soweto uprising. Political action spread across the country and brought a new dimension to the struggle against apartheid. But he also walked into his own denomination, the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, who made some progress in the fight against apartheid in terms of synodical decisions, but not much more than that. The need was for the church to do more and become more bold and active in the struggle against apartheid. So Boesak came into the church with a more radical approach through liberation theology. And it was clear that the church was not ready for this new kind of theology. As he states in his development of an ethic of liberation, he indeed became engaged in historical action. He looked at the church and he identified two fundamental problems in the church in his book, The Finger of God, Sermons on Faith and Social Political Responsibility. First, he said the task which lies at the heart of the core business of the church, namely proclamation of the Word of God, preaching. Secondly, the task which lies with the willingness of the church and its leaders to denounce apartheid openly. He identified relevant preaching as part of the problem of the church in addressing the problem that apartheid poses to the people. He was an exponent on black and liberation theology. And as I've said, he experienced much opposition within the Dutch Reformed Mission Church with regards to its leaders on different levels and with regards to black and liberation theology and its interpretation of the Word of God for a time like apartheid. Many leaders and ministers in the Dutch Reformed Mission Church were not ready or accepting of his new views, his radical theological approach. Boesak's criticism on apartheid was directed at both the apartheid government and the white Dutch Reformed Church, who gave the theological and moral foundation to the policy of apartheid. And as his so-called mother church, the Dutch Reformed Church, at the time still pretty much had a stranglehold on its missionary churches, like the Dutch Reformed Mission Church. There was thus a very cozy relationship, for example, between the leadership of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church and the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa. In the process, many ministers in our denomination didn't want to upset this relationship. Boesak came in and he upset it. He brought the turbulence within that relationship. He actually was doing what the leaders should have done a long time ago. In his fight against apartheid, Boesak could certainly then not leave out the Dutch Reformed Church, because that was the other side of apartheid, as we call it, the National Party in prayer. His theology and motives came under constant attack from within that church, from those who did not see things as he saw it. He was viewed with suspicion in some quarters of the church, and many attempts were made to isolate him in the church. Much opposition against his crusade came in many forms from the leadership and members. At the time, a clear line could be drawn within the Dutch Reformed Mission Church of those who were called radicals and conservatives. It was, however, Boesak's fight with the apartheid political establishment and authorities of the time that defined his struggle against apartheid. Since apartheid, South Africa was so eager to call itself Christian, living by Christian values and supported by the apartheid theology and moral values of the church, the Dutch Reformed Church and Boesak came into conflict with one another. And from these various positions, the church that he held in the church, the Belleville congregation, moderator of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, senior vice president of the South African Council of Churches, and the president of the World Alliance of Reformed Church and the patron of the United Democratic Front, he launched a sustained prophetic attack on the apartheid government. On several occasions in his sermons, speeches, and his writings, Boesak minced no words. He at one point referred to the white people in South Africa as the spiritual children of Adolf Hitler. That might not have set very well with the community and with the church. Another example of Boesak's directly taking the apartheid government on, telling them that the church will not do what they demand, is a sermon he preached in St. George's Cathedral in 1988. Apart from the political and cultural dimensions of white South Africa that enforced apartheid, the apartheid church and apartheid theology and moral justification that was a lifeblood of the evil system. In 1982, Boesak had his finest moment ever. Because you must understand, apartheid rests on two pillars. The one is the political ideology, and the other was the theology and the religion. So 1982 was his finest moment in ministry. In August of 1982, the General Council of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches met in Ottawa, and that occasion presented Boesak with the opportunity to make his ultimate theological attack on apartheid. At the request of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches, the then World Alliance of Reformed Churches, he submitted a study on racism and apartheid in South Africa for that assembly. In the study, Boesak described the apartheid practice in South Africa as both political ideology as well as a pseudo-religious ideology. He targeted both the political and church practice in South Africa. And he said in that research, South African society is based on white racism, maintained by violence and oppression. Legalized discrimination in all areas is a way of life. In South Africa, as I have noted, apartheid is not just a political ideology. Its very existence as political policy has depended and still depends on the theological justification of certain member churches of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. For Reformed churches, this situation should constitute a status confessionis. This means that the churches should recognize that apartheid is a heresy and contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And with this study, he threw the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons in the church and the apartheid political establishment. Strong reactions came from both his own church as well as the white church. The Dutch Reformed Mission Church, for those who think that the Dutch Reformed Mission Church has anything to do with the heresy success in Ottawa. The Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa dismissed the study as the same old story. That was the words of Reverend Tappis Moller, the moderator of the Dutch Reformed Church here in the Western Cape, the late Reverend. Ons moet nou nie sleg praat van die oorledenis nie, maar nou ja. But he also hit a snag in the Dutch Reformed Mission Church. With hindsight of time and history, the reaction from the leadership of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church can be described as a great disappointment. The moderator of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, the late Reverend David Botha, also the editor of the Ligda, the official newspaper of the church, wrote in an editorial, and that was also the statement of the leadership of the Dutch Reformed Church at the time. The impression, he said, was created that the Dutch Reformed Mission Church was a co-responsible for Dr. Boesak's proposal that apartheid be declared as a heresy which is in opposition to the gospel and the confession. The Dutch Reformed Mission Church has not as yet pronounced itself on the proposal. But now that the issue appeared on the agenda, no member church from South Africa can disconnect them. The World Alliance, on Dr. Boesak's request, declared apartheid a heresy, suspended the membership of the Dutch Reformed Church and other white churches. Not only did the Dutch Reformed Mission Church distance itself from Boesak's request, it was not part of the World Alliance's heresy decision. And although it is quite clear why the Dutch Reformed Church dismissed Boesak's study as the same old story, it is difficult to understand how the leadership of his own church could do that, who knew how we had suffered under apartheid. Although it may sound reasonable that the Dutch Reformed Mission Church had no direct co-responsibility for the Boesak study, it is not that simple. At the 1978 Synod of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, it expressed itself on the matter of apartheid. And there the church said that apartheid is irreconcilable with the gospel of Jesus Christ. This matter was a hot potato for the leadership, that they were not prepared to handle it, although this decision was there. And so Dr. Boesak was denounced within his own church on that matter, as well as the Dutch Reformed Church. When you look at his fight against apartheid and the powers that be, you can characterize it in many ways. But the Dutch journalist Rex Bricko, however, aptly describes his relationship with the system and the powers that be. Bricko writes, "A meeting with Dr. Alan Boesak, leader of the black resistance in South Africa, has an aura of a modern-day David experience. While the Goliath of apartheid continues to paralyze his victims, the little shepherd Boesak wounds the monster piece by piece by slinging razor-sharp indictments at his head." Indeed, there was an imbalance of power in this fight. On the one side, there was a powerful entity of apartheid. On the other side was a man of God, with the only weapon he has, the truth of the Word of God and the God of the Word. But he knew he was more powerful because he also knew those who are with him are more than those who are with them. And so he continued slinging his razor-sharp indictment at the head of the monster. When the P.W. Botha government decided to embark on their empty reforms in the tricameral parliament, giving coloureds and Indians their own racial parliaments, Boesak called for action against the government's plan. And that resulted, as the Reverend Marcus said, in the establishment of the United Democratic Front. And at that launch he said the following: "As we struggle on, let us continue to sing the wonderful hymn of freedom, Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika. I know today we are singing that hymn with tears in our eyes. We are singing it while we are bowed down by the weight of oppression and battered by the winds of injustice. We are singing it while our old people languish in resettlement camps and our children are dying of hunger in the homelands. We are singing it now while we suffer under the brutality of apartheid and while the blood of our children calling to God from the streets to God. But we must work for the day when we shall sing it when we shall be free. We shall sing it on that day when our children shall no longer be judged by the color of their skin, but by the humaneness of their character. We shall sing it on that day when in the rich land no child shall die of hunger, and no infant shall die untimely, and our elderly shall close their eyes in peace, and the wrinkled stomachs of our children shall be filled with food, just as their lives shall be filled with meaning. We shall sing it when here in South Africa white and black will have learned to love one another and work together in building a truly good and beautiful land. With this faith we shall yet be able to give justice and peace their rightful place on the throne. Dr. Boesak, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the times we lived in under apartheid were indeed turbulent times. The apartheid system wrecked our lives, and we are still living with those wrecked lives, depriving us from our human and God-given rights, uprooting our lives in more than 1,000 senses, physically, mentally, and spiritually, through an evil system that controlled us and controlled every aspect of our lives. In these turbulent times, you emerge, and your aim was to respond to the system with your own prophetic counter-turbulence in a fight against apartheid. Your pastoral concern, your prophetic calling, courage and commitment place you at the center of political and social struggles of history in and beyond South Africa. You had in you, like the Danish Lutheran pastor Kai Munk, who opposed Hitler and was murdered for it, a holy rage for justice. Your understanding and demonstration of Christian faith, not only as a private personal devotion to God, but disciplined public response in and beyond the walls of the church to God's sovereignty and glory, were and still is a challenge to the church and the powers and authority in the world then and now. You kept the pressure on apartheid. You directed your criticism at both the church and the state. And in both these spheres, you experienced intense opposition and pushback, especially from the apartheid state and its supporters. You made them uncomfortable. You became an inconvenience to the authorities because you were a nagging conscience to them. Because you taught, you preached, and you marched against the things they don't want to talk about, and here you preach about, neither to be marched against. The kind of South Africa Dr. Boesak envisaged for all its people was fundamentally different from that which the apartheid government and its supporters preferred. For Dr. Boesak, the apartheid state and its unjust practices had to give way to a just and peaceful South Africa. Like all true prophets who understood their mission from God, Dr. Boesak understood his prophetic calling under apartheid. As the prophet Jeremiah was mandated from God to uproot and to tear down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Dr. Boesak did not leave apartheid alone to exist and work its evil amongst the oppressed. The turbulence that he created for this time was to displace the system, to wreak all kinds of havoc and to leave apartheid not in any moment of peace. Being the nagging conscience against apartheid, Alan Boesak must have provoked in the state and even in the church the sigh and frustration of King Henry II with regards to Thomas Becket. They might have uttered, muttered, hinted, and thought about the words of Henry II. Is there no one to rid me from this turbulent priest? Indeed, there were thoughts about it. There might have also been plans. We don't know. Like the poison attack on the Reverend Frank Chikane. Professor Nico Koopman writes an article on you in which he tells of an incident where an elder of the Dutch Reformed Church said to him in 1980, back there in the Northern Cape, the following words: Boesak moet loodproe. Boesak must stay select. That is an expression we understand very well in the South African way of speaking, that he must be shot. Dr. Boesak, you remember the attacks at your office and at your home where bricks were thrown through your windows, the death threats on your private line at the office. And there was the incident during the time I worked for you I never told you about. A telephone call came in, and this person was asking for you. Without explaining to the person that you were not in the country, the receptionist transferred the call to me, and the voice on the other side asked in Afrikaans, "Is jy Dr. Boesak?" And I said, "No, Dr. Boesak is overseas." And he said to me, "Jy lieg jou vark, dis jy, ek gaan jou vrek skiet." Just for those who don't understand Afrikaans, he said to me, "You are lying, you pig. I'm going to kill you." It's not the same as the Afrikaans. Dr. Boesak, as we celebrate your life, your work and your legacy at this time, remembering your prophetic ministry under apartheid, we do not always realize how much we in South Africa are indebted to you for being that turbulent priest in our turbulent time, shaking up the status quo, creating a devastating commotion in the midst of apartheid. And even in the theological sanctuary of apartheid, the Dutch Reformed Church, with your heresy declaration, turning the apartheid establishment upside down in order to bring fundamental change to the way we ought to live and exist as a nation and a church. Through your prophetic ministry, you broke down an evil system, and by so doing, ushering in the South African democracy. Dr. Boesak, your legacy is not a body of work for yesterday, something that we should just remember and celebrate. It is a legacy for today, for tomorrow, and beyond, as a lesson to be learned continuously in our time when we face challenges, so that you as a turbulent priest will accompany us into the future to remind us when these things arise, we have a duty to rise against it. Your legacy gives us the courage to battle the turbulent times we face in current day South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Case. I'm going to ask Belinda and Yondo to play their first item, and immediately after that, Mrs. Ventura, you will address us.
Good morning, everybody, and Dr. Boesak and Dr. Boesak. It is indeed a privilege for me, Belinda Jackson, with Yendor Adonis. We represent the sing-along folk club that existed in 1980, 1981 at the then Swannies Inn. Many of us might remember that location very well in Belleville. And the co-founder, Jean Swanson, Benjamin Jacobs, started this organization as a result of many thought leaders that inspired us, and most particularly Dr. Alan Boesak. I was a student at UWC at the time. Every second Sunday, I assisted, sat under your sermons in the Studentenkerk, playing the piano, singing, and with the VCS, and feeling very much inspired to, in my little dorpie in Bredasdorp, also say, hands off my mother. She's not your maid if you speak to her and expect her to say baas and noi. And it was because we sat under your fiery words. Every second Sunday I went because I was an ant soccer and also a cat soccer at some time. So Yendor and I will perform a particular song. In fact, I will now perform a song that Jean Swanson wrote. She became an ANC MP in the Western Cape for social development in the early 80s. Stop killing our children after returning from conference, and our children are still suffering today. So the song is in memory of Jean Swanson, but also being inspired through your words to also resist and to keep the flame of resistance burning within our hearts. I added an extra verse at the end.
Mother, where are the our children the right to be free. Give back to our children sweet memories and dreams. Give back to our children the right to play. Stop killing our children. That's what we say. Where are the daughters of this beautiful land? Our sons and our daughters have devoted their youth to fight for our freedom, for justice and truth, so that little children in years to come could have a childhood and a place in the sun. Give back to our children the right to be free. Give back to our children sweet memories and dreams. Give back to our children the right to play. Stop killing our children. That's what we say. Children all over the world are still fighting for freedom, for justice and peace. Some are abducted and never return. Some are the victims of violence and war. From Cape Town to Gaza, their suffering untold. The world turns a blind eye and leaves them out in the cold. Give back to our children the right to be free. Give back to our children sweet memories and dreams. Give back to our children the right to play. Stop killing our children. That's what we say. Stop killing our children. Stop killing our children. Stop killing our children. That's what we say.
Goeiemôre gemeente, kameraden en Dr. Boesak. Toe dominee Mako my vra om iets te sê namens Elsie's Rivier se struggle, het ek die boekie geskryf en uitgehaal en weer gekrap en gedink, wat sê ek? Want ek gaan dan nou die platform deel met Dr. Ellen Boesak vir die eerste keer in soveel jare. En dis daarom het vir my so 'n groot eer en 'n voorreg is. Dr. Boesak, my gesels vandag, gaan ek maar die boekie eenkant sit en maar praat van die hart af. So, okay, nee, ek vind dit is beter as ek so praat. And I'm going to speak Kaaps, nee? So 'n bietjie Engels, so 'n bietjie Afrikaans, want ek is 'n Afrikaanse meisie. So, here we go. My toespraak gaan nou oor dankbaarheid. Jy weet, die grootste deel van my lewe na die UDF het ek deurgebring in die Civic Associations, burgersvereniging. En dit is 'n platform wat nie maklik was nie. Ek was in Elsie's Rivier, het die hardships geken, 'n kind van forced removals, en hier sit ek nou. Wat doen ek? Ek het 2 seuns wat besig is om hoërskool toe te gaan. En die kinders kom by die huis, en die kinders is kwaad op die Boesak. Die kinders is kwaad, en nie net my kinders nie. Die gemeenskap van Elsie's Rivier se kinders is kwaad. En ek sê, eerste dankbaarheid is toe die UDF gebore is. En nou het ons mos nou rigting. En jy weet, 'n student is 'n snaakse ding, die moment jy die deurtjie bietjie oopmaak. Jy maak nie die deur so bietjie oop, dan storm hulle by jou huis in. Nou ek het gewoon, seker maar sê langs aan Elsie se Rivier Hoërskool. Nou kan u vir u indink, hier is die vrou, en ek is maar standaard 1 onderwyser. En hier kom die kinders, en daar's turbulence op die skoolkamp. En hier kom die kinders aangehardloop, 17 daaraan af. En jy moet nou skuilings sorg vir die kinders. Maar ons het dit oorwin. Ons sê vir u, Dr. Boesak, baie dankie dat u daar was. U weet, u het betekenis gegee aan die Freedom Charter vir ons in die Civic Association. Ons slogan was Housing Security and Comfort. Ons het dit nie in Elsie se Rivier geken nie. Waar is daar comfort? Waar was die houses dat het ons liewer 'n fles gegooi? Waar was die security? Daar was nie die goed nie. Maar ons het vasgeglo in daardie slogan. En waar het ons die opleiding gekry? Ons opleiding het ons gekry deur marches toe te gaan, deur rallies by te woon, deur protesaksies. Daar het ons opvoeding gekry. Baie dankie, Dr. Boesak. U het daar die blaaie van die Freedom Charter vir ons so oopgemaak. Soms het ons gesit en neem ons die groot mense saam. En natuurlijk, julle weet mos die jeug het hulle eie manier van politiek moes nou praat. En wat weet ek, en aan die Nieuwdeel, aan die Kassie, Mr. Anta, wat weet ons van dialectical materialism? Ons weet nie wat het is nie. Ek is 'n standaard 1 juffroukie. Nou moet ek met die Civic Association praat oor die goed. Dankie, Dr. Boesak. U het vir ons regtig waar oopgemaak. That we had an understanding of what dialectical materialism is. Not that something there in books, whatever. You brought it down. Every rally, we dissected what you said. In civic meetings, people will talk about the rally that we attended, the funeral that we attended. Even if it was a funeral, het ons in die Civic Association geleer wat ons daaruit kry. So ek sê vir u, Dr. Boesak, baie dankie vir wat u beteken het. U weet, en as een persoon, die seker Mr. Antas in die hemel, hy het altyd gesê, toe die vrye dae so nader kom, toe sê hy vir die boer daar op die plaas, toe sê hy, jong mannetjie, Bas, ons gaan ons mekaar in die hemel kry. Toe sê die boer vir hom, wat? Waar jy al ooit 'n swart engel gesien? You see, those are moments close to my heart. Dit wat ek geleer het by die gewone Civic Association. Nie dat die jeug so goed nie belangrik was nie. Ja, dit was baie belangrik vir my. Die jeug het vir ons ook mos nou hulle idees gegee van wat gedoen moet word en hoe en wat ook al. Maar die belangrikste is, ons het geleer by u. Ons het geleer by u, Dr. Boesak, deur rallies by te woon. En te sit. We sit in awe listening to what you are saying. Deur protesaksies by te woon. Deur wat zijn nog? Begrafenissen. Al daardie gebeurtenisse het u vir ons amper, ons is 'n universiteit. You know, ons sit daar as Civic Association members, maar ons het ingeneem wat u vir ons geleer het. So ek wil vir u sê, baie dankie wat u vir ons beteken het. Ek weet dit is nou nie 'n hoë professor toespraakie, maar dit kom hier. Baie dankie. Baie dankie.
Mrs. Ventura is, I know you're only being modest, she was the chairperson of Elsies River Civic Association for many years. In 1994, she became an MP in the provincial government. We're very proud of her. She was a representation, like she is today, of absolute humility. And we love you and we respect you. Thank you. I'm going to ask Peter and Bobby Presents to come forward. There's a little video clip, Vivian, that you will have to play now, but you will introduce it for us as well. Peter will also tell us a little bit about who he is, so that I don't give too much detail on that. Welcome, Peter and Bobby, please.
Thank you. If we can play the video clip, I'll appreciate it. And I will speak about the person who's in the video clip as well. It's just a 1-minute clip, if that's okay.
Glad to wish you a happy birthday and say I am thankful for all your efforts in working for justice. It is quite clear from your activities that you were committed to it and wanted people to be free. And as a man of the cloth yourself, I put you among the thinking of the prophet Amos, who says, "Let justice roll on like a river, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May that position of yours be continued in your life and not give up at all, in spite of people who have contrary views to you. I wish you well. God bless you."
Good morning. I extend my gratitude to Dr. Boesak and the organizers of this celebration for granting me the opportunity to reflect briefly on the few intersections between his life and ours, my wife Bibi and mine. She decided not to join me here this morning. She's rather sitting in the audience. When we celebrate somebody's life, especially somebody like Dr. Boesak, whose national and international roles have placed him in the public eye, we are often tempted to remember them primarily for their public achievements, well-known speeches, the marches they led, the positions they held. A person is not ultimately defined by the positions they hold, but by the choices they make when circumstances demand moral courage. It is in those moments when action carries personal risk and silence offers safety that character becomes visible. Public stature may tell us what a person achieved, but it is private courage that reveals who they truly are. This morning, I will reflect on a few instances where Dr. Boesak's actions impacted Bibi and my life. I do so not because I think our journey is unique, because it is not. I do so because I'm convinced that there are many others who share similar, perhaps untold experiences, moments when he stood with them, perhaps intervened on their behalf, or made himself available when it would have been far safer not to do so. When the church felt distant. In the first half of 1985, I sat alone in my bedroom in El Dorado Park, south of Johannesburg. I had just turned 21. That evening I made two decisions that would shape the rest of my life. The first was to step away from the church. And at that stage, I believe it meant stepping away from Christianity itself. Only once I had done that did I feel I could take the second decision, to join the ANC and MK, without feeling that I was betraying my faith. I did not see how the armed struggle against apartheid and the Christian faith could coexist. The books I read, many written by white Christian theologians who justified apartheid on theological grounds, had convinced me that large parts of the church had already chosen the side of apartheid. The resolutions of the Kerkraad of the congregation where I grew up, just down the road in 19th Avenue, Elsies River, were clear. Political activity of any nature was not permitted on church property. And any member who disobeyed this ruling would face disciplinary measures, which in practice meant that organized resistance to social injustice had no recognized place within the space of the church. With those words ringing in my ears, where could I go when my political awakening conflicted with my church's position? How could I approach my dominee or a kerkraadslid for guidance? I feared that even seeking counseling from them might draw the attention of the security police. In that moment, the church felt less than a sanctuary and more like a risk. And once I made those two decisions, life became profoundly lonely. You carry convictions you cannot explain. You make plans you cannot share. You protect the very people you love and trust by withholding the truth from them. And in my case, I even withdrew from the internal political structures and comrades with whom I previously engaged, deepening the isolation. It's a strange loneliness. One I believe that many of us who chose the path of the armed struggle experienced. To be surrounded by a community of activists and yet to carry those decisions alone, often unable to explain ourselves even to those we love most. A few months later, I was well on my way to establishing links with the ANC via Comrade Curtis Nkondo, who assisted us in leaving the country. On Comrade Curtis's advice, I asked Bibi to marry me and to leave the country with me. A decision that meant she was saying yes not only to marriage, but to a path neither of us could fully see. At that time, he handed me a sealed letter to deliver to Dr. Boesak on my next visit to Cape Town. A few days after handing the letter over to him, Dr. Boesak phoned me and asked me to meet him at his office. I was still unsure on how the engagement would unfold. Would he understand? Would he understand my decision? Or would he tell me that I was on the wrong path? When I walked into his office, he simply said, "Pieter, kom ons gaan stap." In that moment, I knew he understood. He understood that what we were about to discuss was something not for walls with ears. We would often, over the next years, go for a walk outside his office. In that period of loneliness, something shifted. For the first time, I felt I was not carrying that decision alone. Dr. Boesak, what your response meant to me that time is difficult to describe even after 40 years. It meant that my conscience was not dismissed. It meant that faith and struggle did not have to stand on opposite sides. It meant that the church, through you, Dr. Boesak, did not turn away. Not only did Dr. Boesak provide us with counseling, but he also married us on 27 December 1985. He married us in the same 19th Avenue congregation where political activity had been prohibited. It was not lost on us that faith and struggle met visibly that day. We sang the freedom song, "We Shall Overcome," never before heard in that church. As we signed the register, my sister Cynthia played in Nkosi Sikeleli Africa on the organ. Never before heard in that church. We had our reception in this very church hall where we sit this morning. Before that evening, leaving for Johannesburg, and 7 days later, Bibi and I arrived in Botswana. As far as our family and friends were concerned, we left for our honeymoon. By the time we left, 5 people knew the journey we embarked on. My comrade Ike Abrams, he was introduced to me by Dr. Hannes Adonis, who was the dominee at this church. Curtis Nkondo, Dr. Bayes Nodia, Dr. Alan Boesak, and my father. Those of us who took these kind of decisions would know that you need to carefully decide who you trust during those days. My father not only understood our decision, he assisted with arrangements for us to leave the country. He would go on to support us quietly in the underground work in the years that followed. Solidarity across borders. After a brief period in Lusaka, Zambia, Bibi and I were sent for training in a camp called Pango in northern Angola, east of Luanda. 6 months later, mid-June, we landed back in Gaborone on our way home. The ANC had booked us into the Gaborone Sun, a hotel far beyond our means, leaving us responsible for the account. It was also the first time we had been in contact with our families since leaving Botswana in January. In conversation with my father, I mentioned that we ran out of money. and did not know how we would be able to return home. I think those of you remember, I think a day or two after we landed in Botswana, a state of emergency was declared. Around about 13th June, if I recall correctly, in South Africa. Then one afternoon, the hotel phone rang. Who could it be, we wondered. Nobody knew we were there. I answered the phone. Hoe gaan dit, Pieter? Ek is hier by ontvangs. The person on the other end of the line said, kom asseblief af, ek wag hier vir jou. If my mind ever tried to make sense of a situation but failed, this was it. The Afrikaans was fluent, clearly the person's first language, not a Cape Town accent. I stayed in Johannesburg, not a Johannesburg accent. Must be a white person, I thought. My immediate thoughts were that the apartheid security establishment located us. It was Bibi's turn to be confused when I answered the person in Afrikaans and asked, wie is dit? Convinced that it was the South African security establishment, we considered three options. We go down together, I go down alone, or we leave quietly and disappear in the streets of Gaborone. In moments like that, any decision could have been the wrong one. Two of us finally agreed that I would go down, as if we felt it's safer to meet the South African security establishment in the hotel lobby than on the streets of Gaborone. So it was with extreme reservation that I headed downstairs. I had no idea what the person looked like. But trust me, I looked at every white man on my way down. At reception, I told the receptionist that I was expecting somebody. She pointed me to a man. I could not believe my eyes. Not only was our visitor not a white security policeman, but rather he was a black man. He was dressed as a priest. His first words to me were, Peter, I've been sent by Dr. Alan Boesak. My name is Archbishop Walter Makulo. You've just listened to him. Unbeknown to us, in Cape Town, my father contacted Dr. Boesak. Dr. Boesak in turn contacted Archbishop Makulo, who ensured that our hotel bill was paid. We ensured that we had sufficient funds to return safely to Cape Town. He took the time to introduce us to his family and friends. So by the time we left Botswana, we knew people outside of the ANC, should we be detained. In that moment, Dr. Boesak, your national and your international standing did not distance you from us. Your call to Archbishop Makulo became our protection. Together, the two of you ensured that two young activists were not left stranded and exposed. And it was done quietly, without the need for recognition. Quiet risk for the cause. Dr. Boesak's support did not end there. After our return working underground, he was always there to support us. At different stages, he assisted us financially, enabling travel when travel carried risk, helping us support comrades when resources were scarce, and later providing funds for underground activities that required absolute discretion. He did not ask for operational detail. He did not require public acknowledgement. He understood enough to know that the struggle for justice was not theoretical. It required practical support. What I came to understand over time was that his courage was not only expressed from pulpits and platforms. It was expressed in quiet risk in decisions made privately, where the cost was real and recognition neither sought nor expected. In closing, the question for us. So what do we do with a life like Dr. Alan Boesak's? We can speak about it with admiration. We can recall the speeches, the positions, the public moments, and those do matter. But if we leave it there, we will have reduced something living to something historical. The real tribute to Dr. Boesak is not praise, it's reflection. It's allowing his life to ask something of us. When our time demands courage, will we be present? Or will we be careful? And if we are people of faith, another question, will we use the church as shelter from history or as a force within history? Dr. Boesak showed in word and deed that justice is not an abstract idea. It's something one steps into. He showed that leadership is not about prominence, it's about responsibility. And he showed through interventions like the one that brought Archbishop Makulu to our hotel reception in Botswana, that solidarity is not a slogan, it's a decision. May we honor him not only with our words, but with our own willingness to stand where standing matters. Dr. Boesak, while history will rightly remember you for your public witness, I want to thank you for something more personal, for being present when we were young, uncertain and carrying more fear than what we showed, for acting quietly, decisively, and without hesitation in moments that changed the course of our lives. And I know ours is not the only story. I'm certain there are many others to whom you offered similar support, away from the headlines, whose lives were quietly steadied by your intervention. At moments when it mattered most, and often without any need for recognition. For that quiet courage, Dr. Boesak, and for the lives altered because you chose to act, we remain deeply grateful. I thank you from Pete and Bibi Prasad.
So Mrs. Ventura spoke about the street university. We were taught on the streets, at our funerals, and everywhere we were. But I think what you did, Peter, was to take us another level and say to us that the compassionate pastor gave a new identity to what church should be, and took you through your youthful journey and made you part and allowed you and Bibi to make the contributions that you made. Bless both of you. En ek wil sommer aangaan, maar nou soveel wat die mens nou, ek weet, ek kan nog baie sê. Siki Blanga is a young African woman voice, and we want to welcome you this morning. I won't tell you what the other things is that Doc said about you. Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Happy birthday to Dr. Boesak, and greetings to Dr. Elna Boesak, and greetings to all of you. It's a great honor to be in your midst. I feel like I'm standing on holy ground, having heard such special stories of how we've been fought for. And of course the question is, the song is Senzenina. It means, you can translate it in many ways. What have we done? But you can also ask, what have we done with what has been done for us? I am deeply moved. I just want to honor you for all the stories you've shared today. I truly feel like I'm standing on holy ground and on a very powerful sacrifice. So the first time I heard of Dr. Boesak would have been from my mother, who used to talk about how hard you all fought in Cape Town against apartheid, and just how powerful Dr. Boesak was. And but the first time I met Dr. Boesak was actually in 2015. It was Kairos 30, which was a celebration of 30 years of Kairos. And I happened to be sitting next to him. I was supposed to be writing a poem for the event, or for the memory of Kairos 30 years, and he was writing a sermon. And I thought that was going to be my only moment in life where I would ever be sitting next to Dr. Boesak, and I thought I'll say, I wrote with Dr. Boesak once. Of course, you know, he was just sitting next to me and we weren't even talking, didn't even know my name, but it was very powerful. And I'd always heard about when he preached, people always told me, they said, after he spoke during the gathering, people would always shout, Boesak, 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 you know? And I remember when he preached that time, I'm telling you, I'd never heard anybody preach on justice the way that he did. And I didn't want to shout, Boesak, Boesak. I literally felt like I saw Jesus coming out of his mouth. And part of the sermon, that because Jesus is revealed when we talk about justice. But Dr. Boesak asked me to share a story that happened last July. So in July last year, we had some brothers from the US and sisters, others from the UK and South Africa and on the continent, who were gathered at UNISA. It was like a transatlantic roundtable to discuss matters of justice. And then after that, they were given, the veterans that fought against apartheid were awarded with awards for having fought, like Dr. Jeremiah Wright, Dr. Ivor Carruthers, Dr. Alan Boesak, and many others. And so now we were walking inside the hotel, we're back at the hotel, and I was helping Dr. Ivor with her awards, and it was written apartheid on it. And there was this man who was trying to chat me up, and I was not interested. And so then he caught what I was carrying, and then he said, apartheid, apartheid. And I was thinking, oh goodness, can he just, you know? So then I said, and then he kept going on, apartheid, apartheid. And I was thinking, if this man says this apartheid thing again, I said, can't you see who this is? Because I'm walking right next to Dr. Boesak, and you're talking about apartheid. You should be going on about, he's like right here. And then he says, I said, don't you know who this is? And he didn't know. He was just like, no. And I said, someone who fought for you and you're talking about apartheid? And then he was so shocked, so he walked away. And he was a bit shaken, so we sat down. And then he came back again, and he said, okay, I remembered. And then he told a story. He said he was in Limpopo as a student, and they listened to tapes that were sent around that had Dr. Boesak's voice in it, and it said, all all God's beaches for all God's people. And he remembered that phrase, and, and he'd never been to a beach in his life. And yet he was so moved by this phrase that for him was Dr. Boesak, that he heard that there were people, wherever there were beaches, that they can now go to the beaches because all God's beaches for all God's people. So I wanted to share that story, but I also wanted I wrote a little something because my mother would have wanted me to. Boesak, Boesak, Boesak. They cheered in song, Boesak, Boesak, drunk with new courage that flowed from the winepress of your pulpit. Boesak, Boesak. I read an account once of how your words turned terrorized mourners into a fearless army, like David's little stone before Goliath. They arrived afraid at a funeral, afraid of trigger-ready guns that pointed at them as they mourned. But you preached with your fiery voice, "We are not afraid," until the crippling apartheid fear was cast out of the mourners, words baptizing them in courage that saw them storm forward rather than cowering before guns. They also chanted, "We are not afraid. We are not afraid." You turned the guns of the mellow yellow men into sticks that day. No one died that day. You preached, "We are not afraid," until the defenseless found their faith and their voices. You cast out fear and cast it back into the sea of the regime. They called you a terrorist because no amount of their walls or bombs or security forces could protect them from being terrorized by the truth you preached. They called you a terrorist because your voice terrorized them in their sleep. Their power was manufactured, it depended on fear and force. Yours was real power, God's power, the people's power, born of invincible love, the love of God, the love of people, love that could not be stopped by bombs or guns. Everyone who marched and died for our freedom, many without fame or name, did so out of love. The love of their people, the love of justice, the love of freedom. That love is the fire in your bones. This is why when they say, "Shut up, you cannot," you know who died. You know where they are buried. You know they deserve better. You cannot keep quiet. God protected you. God preserved you. God preserved a prophetic voice through various trials. Yes, as I heard somewhere, God did not make you rich, but He made you pretty. Pretty persistent, pretty anointed and gifted, pretty untouchable, even when all forces tried to eliminate you, and pretty alive and bouncing at 8 years old. Happy birthday to the Boesak.
Thank you, Ziki. And now we're going to ask Jackie Mouton to just make a short input, and then George Molubatsi, are you here? Where's George? George is not here, so it's Jackie, and then we are close to moving on to the open mic. So your short speeches, thank you.
Goeiemiddag dames en here. Ek maak verskoning. Ek praat Afrikaans. Vir die wat ek kan verstaan nie, ek kan ook Engels praat, maar dit is 'n vreemde taal soos Grieks vir my. So ek praat Afrikaans. Ek kan stadig dit doen. Stil kerels. Hier gaan 'n man verby. For those English-speaking people, be quiet. A man is passing by. It's a phrase of honor. It's a person of stature that passes by. It's a man of note. It is the entry lines of a poem written for Generaal de Wet. But every word in that poem applies to Dr. Boesak. It is a powerful poem. Dames en here, Dr. Boesak, ek wil nie vandag praat oor dokter nie. Ek wil praat oor dominee Boesak. Soos my ma gesê het, ek wil praat met die man wat papiere het in godsgeleerdheid. Dis iets heeltemal anders. As jy 'n papier het in godsgeleerdheid, is jy amper in die hemel. So jy moet net nog jou toon in die deur kry. Nee, my ma het so gevoel. Dokter, ek groet u as priester. Ek groet u as profeet. 'n man van godsgeleerdheid. 'n man met 'n kristalbal. 'n kristalbal wat genoem word die Bybel. Want binne in die Bybel sien hy wat hy nie veronderstel is om te sien nie, wat onsigbaar is. Weet hy wat ander mense nie weet nie, wat verborge is. Daai kristalbal, wat 'n mens die Bybel noem, het vir hom sy bonatuurlike vermoë gegee om te sien, om te hoor, om te weet. Dr. Boesak, dominee Boesak, my man is oorlede, my eerste man. Ek het 'n tweede en ek oppas moet keer laat ek nommer 3 vat. My huidige man het gesê, jy gaan nie by my in die graf kry nie. My man was Suid-Afrika. Ek was Suid-Afrika se vrou, God troos sy siel. En hy het een oggend met my gepraat. Maar ek sal nie glo nie, die Here wat ons dien is werklik. Ek gaan badkamer toe om net my tande te borsel. Ek hoor 'n gesnork. Ons het nou gesê as hy my keer niks, hy gaan nou fietsry. Toe ek in die kamer kom, toe sy besig om sy laaste asem uit te blaas. En ek vra vir Andre, dominee Boesak se neef, want hulle is mos nou in die ring van Zoar, hou sy begrafnis. Hy sê nee, hy gaan sy neef vra, Ellen. Ek dink maar, hoe sal hy dan nou weet wat hier in die droë Karoo aangaan? Ons is in Prins Albert. Ek bedoel, daar gebeur, soos die mense sê, elke 5 minute niks, daar hou dit 10 minute aan. Ons is in Namari se Morawiese kerk. Hy wou daar begrawe word. Ek het toe sy wens gestand gedoen. Dominee Boesak gaan op die preekstoel. Ek kan tot vandag toe nog alles onthou wat hy gepreek het. Genesis 26. Sy inleiding was, daar was Abraham, Isak en Jakob. God het vir hulle elkeen 'n opdrag gegee. Vir Abraham het hy gesê trek. Vir Isak het hy gesê bly. Want Sarah het prins Albert toe gegaan en het vir 18 jaar daar gebly tot die Here gesê het, "Boetakkie, jy kan maar nou huis toe kom." Toe sê hy tyd klaar. Hy het vertel. Hy het gepreek en ek herhaal wat ek onthou. Hy het gesê, God het vir hom gesê, hy het vertel van hy moes na Abimelek toe gaan. God het vir hom gesê, jy gaan nie na Egipte toe nie. Ek is nou heeltemal weg van struggle af. Ek is nou by die godsgeleerdheid. Ja, en hy sê, Dr. Boesak sê van die preekstoel af, God het vir hom gesê, jy gaan grawe die fonteine oop. En almal gebruik die fonteine. Ek dink, hoe weet die man wat aangegaan het in Prins Albert? Hoe kan hy dit weet? En hy lees in die eerste 2 fonteine, toe beklei hulle nog met hom, toe sê hulle, is ons fonteine. Hy het geweet, dis nie maklik nie. Dit was nie maklik om die fonteine op te grawe nie. How did he know? En hy vertel en hy verduidelik en hy lees sy bediening uit tot op die woord. Dis profeet. Dis in die kristalbal kyk. Dit is met jou God in jou liggaam loop, sodat hy vir jou nie eens in jou oog kan fluister nie. Sodat hy uit jou mond uit spuug wat hy wil hê, jy moet sien. Dr. Boesak, my oom was toen 'n ou oom en sy naam was Isak. Hy kom die dag by die huis en sê, niemand het nog gepreek oor Isak in die kerkie. Hulle preek oor Abraham, maar die man het vandag gepreek oor Isak. Dankie, Dr. Boesak. Jy het my oom vandag gemaak. Dit is die salf wat hy in my gesmeer het. Dis die salf wat hy aan my kinders gesmeer het. Die salf wat hy aan die gemeente van Prins Albert wat met busse gekom het, Mamrie toe. Dis die salf wat hy aan ons gesmeer het. Nou gisteraand gaan kuier ons by Belinda, al die ouspan. En 'n vriend van ons, Hein Willems, is 'n vrou sit daar en sy vertel 'n voorval. En ek vra vir haar, kan ek dit hierso sê? Want dit het my so getref. Sy sê, sy was 'n verpleegster. Sy sê dat 'n verpleegster saam met haar gewerk van Guguletto. Die verpleegster sê, die man wat ek die grootste respek het voor, is Ellen Boesak. Want toe hulle ons kinders so skiet, wou niemand hulle begrawe nie. Watter kerk ook al, watter denominasie ook al, hulle wou nie hulle hande vuil hê nie. Hulle wou nie bloed aan hulle hande hê nie. Dan het hulle gesê, gaan na Boesak toe. Hy gaan hulle begrawe. Dan het hy gekom, hulle het opgemars, net soos sy gesê het, die man het met die R4 geweer in die pad gestaan, op hulle gerig. As jy uit jou spoor trap, dan skiet hulle jou. Dan het hy, wat dominee Boesak, Dr. Boesak is oom Ellen, het op sy knieë gegaan en gebid. Dit het vir haar die grootste respek gegee. Weer eens, soos ek gesê het, ek praat nie van Dr. Boesakie, ek praat van Godsman. Die Godsman in hom het in die geval die respek vir haar gegee. Ek dank u.
And so I want to bring this afternoon to a close. I still think we've missed it if we don't just remind you again. Theology, not made in the university, but a theology written on the streets of our land. You transformed every talkie to read the Bible differently. And I know if there's nothing else that they could destroy, there's one thing that they wanted to destroy, was black liberation theology. A theology that is part of the liberation theological rubric, a theology that has made and enabled all of us to become theologians. So, thanks, Doctor. Thank you very much, and happy birthday.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying for so long during this event. Baie dankie. I was sitting there and you probably would have noticed, toe dink ek, ja, die boere het altyd gedink, ek is so quiet bekleed die hele tyd. Maar my kinders het geweet, ek is maar lig op petrol. And as I was listening, I was deeply, deeply, deeply moved. And it's just too amazing for words. I should begin by thanking Reverend Marco, Reverend Links, Reverend Daniel Case, who put together this event, the congregation of Greenwood VGK, who made these facilities available and other things. And so that is done. I should thank everyone who came. I should thank the special speakers who took trouble to come today. And as you were speaking, I knew that you had thought very carefully about what you were going to say, because there is so much more that we could say. So baie dankie Mrs. Ventura, baie dankie Pieter en Bibi, baie dankie Siki, baie dankie Jackie, baie dankie almal wat iets gesê het in die open gesprek, in the open mic session. I am very, very honored by the presence of everyone, especially the family of Bernard Fortuin, David and Agnes and Sydney and Douglas and Madeline and Lavona, van 6de Straat, Eerste Riviera. I will never forget that day. And I will never forget what that policeman did and said. I have written that up in a book. I have told people about that story for I don't know how long, all across the world, the story of Bernard Fortuin. And the policeman said, "Dat die bastard vrek." I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget. I'm so happy that we can talk about those days. Elna, who is here today, was not part of my life in those days, but she was part of my life when the revenge of the system for those days came down on our family. I will never forget Rapport, who went crazy when we got married, and went crazy right through the trial. And when it was decided that I should go to prison, het Rapport 'n opskrif gehad, "Sal die wit vrou hom nou los." And so today, at my 80th, we also were married for 36 years this year. And she has been a rock, this woman. And I'm just so grateful for you. This is my bride for 36 years. And you know, it is true. I mean, when you get married, you don't sign on for the stuff, baby. You don't sign on for this kind of life. You sign on for a different kind of life. But when God brings that other kind of life upon you, what we make as decisions that we believe is in faithfulness to God, you have no idea the consequences that has for your family. And if the family walks away from you, under those circumstances, you can't even blame them. But when they stand with you, the way this woman had stood with me, all of those years, every single day of the years of imprisonment was just a gift from so dankie baby. I thank everyone who came up today to say something. Dankie Graham, Pastor Graham Duff was my pastoor in die tyd van Malmesbury en in die tyd van Goodwood. Hy is ook die een wat die briewe, die tronkbewaarder wat nou is, kan niks doen nie, want dit is allemaal afgetree. Maar hy is die een wat die briewe in en uitgesmokkel het, tussen my en my vrou, in sy Bybel. As te laat nie. But so I'm grateful for your being here today. Waar is Bishop Ramelin? Is hy nou weg? He's gone, right? That's a pity. Because I wanted to say thank you for him. He's a man with great initiatives. He took all sorts of initiatives. The first one succeeded. I'm not sure whether this one will succeed, but we will see. Mr. Ndekazi, thank you. Nathan, thank you. Dani, Bye, Donkey, Siki, thank you. I mean, everybody. The music, Yolanda and Yolanda, thank you. Belinda, sorry. Thank you so very, very much. Those were amazing songs that you brought with you today. I am just so grateful for everyone who, in those days when it mattered, stood up. Oh, Fidai en my friend, the groot pastoor van Etenach, baie dankie dat jy. They came all the way from Port Elizabeth, from Utenake to be here today. Pastor Carl Hendricks was here earlier. He came all the way with his wife from Johannesburg. Clyde came all the way from Johannesburg. So it really does matter to people what happens here today. But I want to say thank you to everyone, all those masses who when it mattered and when it was darkest, took your life in your hands because you had a dream in your heart. And you stood up against a regime that would be designated by the world international community as a crime against humanity. And you stood up against a powerful church whose theology would be designated a heresy and a blasphemy. And those were powerful forces. You didn't know where it would take you. I just had the utmost respect for the youth of that time. You're all older now. But you remember what you were like when you were young. You remember your aspirations and your hopes for yourself. You remember that you took with you the hope and the dreams and the aspirations of your mother and your father and your uncles and your family, because you were the first one from those families to ever set foot on a university campus. Those were privileges that they did not have. My friend William Steenkamp is still here, thank you. He came all the way from Kimberley. He was one of those young people. He looks like Gandhi if you look at him from afar. And so he inspires me still by just looking the way he does. But you know that you represented the hopes for a different future of a whole generation. And I will never forget. I mean, we would be in the chapel on Sunday night and we would be on the streets on Monday morning, because you also understood that your worship of God in the sanctuary cannot be real unless it becomes the worship of God in the streets of confrontation, in the streets of protest, and in the streets of imprisonment, and in the streets of death. You saw the young comrade next to you. What were you, 15, 16, 17 years old at the time? The young comrade next to you got killed. And we went to the funeral. And yet you understood that I cannot stand back because I saw a coffin lowered into a grave of somebody far too young to die. And yet that next day you were on the streets again. You didn't know whether you would make it to the end of this year. We could not promise you, in all of the eloquence of any speech, that by the end of this year apartheid would be over. It's okay, make the little sacrifice right now, because within a year we could not say that, but you took your life in your hands and you put it on the altar, not for yourself, but for another generation that should not fight the same fight, that we are still fighting the same fight, because we are not yet free. It's one of the things that keeps my anger like a fire burning inside of me. And it makes me understand that we cannot stop. We cannot stop until that what we fought for becomes a reality in the South Africa. I will probably be buried in a country that would remain the country that I fought in, but not the country that I fought for. And so there is another obligation on another generation. Willem Klute, Junior, that day at UWC, I was very worried. How would I say it if I'm told not to say it? But you know, people who think that the Holy Spirit works only when you're in church, think again. She is present at every point in your life if she knows you are trying to do God's work. And we did God's work that day. And so, Puti, thank you so much for reminding me of that day. Ek mag nie sê nie, en sal nie sê nie, en sal nie sê. There are the pictures out there, but there is let me just first say, I want to end with two just sort of reminiscences of my own. This whole street, apart from Bernard Fontaine, this is one of the most famous streets in the country, like Vilakazi Street in Soweto, like Thornton Road in Athlone. There might be streets in the Eastern Cape that you will know of that carries the weight of the symbolism, that carries the courage of our people. I mean, it's if even today, with everything that happened and everything that did not happen, and despite everything that should have happened and did not happen, there is something about these streets. And at the top of the street is St. Nicholas, right? People remember St. Nicholas. And I remember St. Nicholas for that prayer service that we had in the time that P.W. Botha made a decree that prayer services for those in detention would be banned. We are not allowed to pray for those. And I remember that in the foundation we had a bumper sticker with the quote from Hebrews 13, pray for those who are in prison, as if you were in prison with them. So we had that bumper sticker. And they were, of course, angry about that. One of the things that they questioned me about when they finally had me in solitary confinement in Pretoria Central Prison. But St. Nicholas, I remember, for that afternoon, Sunday afternoon, I was away and I came in, I think I was overseas, I came in on the Saturday. So I was not scheduled to preach or to speak, I just came to the service and they had other speakers, but in the end, you know how it is, they do ask you to say something, and I was busy speaking when Captain Okkert van Schalkwyk, who was the head of the riot squad in the Western Cape, came into that church with his soldiers, with their guns, Bishop Templeton, and he lined them up against the wall of the church inside.
We were inside that church, all arrested, Ventura, Grace.
Well, you see, you remember that day? Toen hij mij zei, stop nu, Dr. Boesak. Want ek het iets om te sê, en ek sê, sit neer, want die woord van die Here word nou ook, luister na die woord van die Here. Nou, he pulled the microphone out of my hand, I pulled the microphone, so I had to project my voice. That's the day when we, and then he walked out. Ek sê van, wat beteken dit technisch? Hy sê, hierdie kerk is onder technische arrest. Ek vraag, wat beteken dit? He couldn't even answer, so he walked out, but he left the soldiers in the church, like when they had their guns aimed at us. My kop, daai klomp. But the wonderful thing is, when that chap came up with a gun, two things happened that day. It was pure miracle. The colleagues, the rest of the clergy who were there, got up from where they were sitting and made a kind of a circle around me. Now, I mean, it shows you, waar kan predikante jou kom beskerm teen 'n gun wat in jou kop is. But they believe it strengthens, and it did. It's amazing. En daar was het gebed, en daar was 'n uitjie wat in die kerk hardop begin bid het. Hy is op sy knieë. Here, sê hy, ons het gedink Hitler is dood. Maar Here, Hitler lewe nog. Here, Hitler is in die kerk vandag. So they picked him up literally on his knees and took him out and threw him in the police van. But when we got out of the church, apparently the technical arrest was somehow lifted. We went out of the church. I got into my car. In the yard of the church, there were women, people from the community, there were Muslim women who could not go out into the church with us, but prayed with us, standing outside. As I got into my car, they shot a tear gas canister through the back window, rear window, right into the car. And I just heard this thing land and the gas exploded. And all I remember is shutting off the car and trying to get out, and I couldn't, and somebody from one of the women shouted, "Ag, Here het hom geskiet." And somebody came, opened the door, took me to a house, and the women revived me. As the women looked after the body of Jesus, the women revived. I mean, what can you say, right? And they did a good job. I think I still preached in the chapel that night, but I almost lost my life that day. If it were not for the women. If it were not for the women. Women who could not enter a Christian church, but stood out in the yard and prayed to Allah to preserve my life. Allahu Akbar is all that I can say. So we see, but that's the one thing about this road that I wanted to tell. The other thing is linked to this picture here. There was in 1985, during the state of emergency, there were uprisings in George and in a squatter camp that we called Lawaai Camp in those days in George. So there was, in those uprisings, a young man was shot, one of the activists. and we went to go and bury him. I was sitting in the church, and there was a colleague, I don't know from which church, who was speaking, and he was speaking in isiXhosa, so I could not understand. But as he was speaking, he was getting more and more excited, and the congregation was getting more and more restless. So I asked the Xhosa colleague sitting next to me, I said, what is he saying? And he says, he is saying that this young man was an activist, but that his hiding place was betrayed by an informant who got paid by the police. And as he was speaking, somebody, a young man in the church, jumped up and said, he's talking about me, but it's not true, it's not true, it's not true. It was like a flash. In a second, people were jumping up in the church, activists, and they got a hold of him, and they were dragging him outside of the church, and they were going to kill him because of that accusation. I don't know how, there's a railing, I don't know how I got over that railing with my robe on. But I rushed outside and I just called on the UDF people there, said, make way for me, and they did. I mean, it was like this, very disciplined. They opened the way for me, I got outside, too late to stop people from hitting him because he was already bleeding from his eye. And they had already thrown some petrol on his head. So that picture that you see, the hand with the broken glasses, that's his hand. Grabbing me from the back, that head against my shoulder is his head. And I just said to people, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. They were going to necklace him that day. So they finally listened to me, and as I took him out of the crowd and the UDF people making way for me, I said to somebody, I need a car, I need a car, I need a car. The photographer was a man by the name of Peter Turnley. He worked for the Detroit Free Press. Peter Turnley took his hands off the camera, but he kept on clicking the camera for photos. That's how we got that picture. And he took out the keys of his car from his pocket and he threw it to me. He says, my car, that's my car. So as I took this man to the car, I drove him out away from the crowd, and I said to him, you find your way out, I got to go back to the church. I need still to preach, right? So he got away some point, but that was that for that day. But here is the real story. So 20 years later, I am back in George for some community event. I stand there, and somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, Dr. Boesak, you probably won't know who I am. I said, no, I don't. He said, but do you remember Levi Kamp? I said, yes. Do you remember that church service? I said, yes. And he said, do you remember the man whose life you saved? I said, yes. He says, I am that man. But that's not even the story. That's not even the story. So he says, I came here today because I want to introduce you to somebody. He turned around, there is this beautiful young woman. He said, this is my daughter. She is 21 years old. She is studying at UCT for her degree. She's finishing this year, he says. And I always tell her, if it were not for him, you would not have had a father. That to me, 20 years later, so that's that story. So, yeah, now you can. So it seems, and there are, every picture that you will see there will have a kind of a story behind it. And so today, at my 80th, I'm amazed that I am still alive. I will not tell all of the stories of how close I came to death, or how somebody from the ANC said to me, they did what they did to you because they knew they couldn't kill you like they killed, or like somebody, let me put it that way, killed Chris Hani. But they had to take you out some way or another. And his way of putting it, he says, they did not only want to get rid of you, they looked at you in Elna and they thought they wanted, his words, to drive a train through this marriage. Because they thought if you could get the two of you out of each other's lives, you will not make it. They had hoped that I would become some kind of alcoholic or because of despair and hopelessness. But as I said to one of them, julle het vir alles gebudget meneer, maar julle het nie vir die Here gebudget nie. En as ons nou in die NG Kerk, maar ek sal maar sê wat my broers en susters in die Pinkster my geleer het, die Here is die Here. Ons kan dit nie so lekker sê nie, want ons by die wit mense geleer, die Here is die Here. Maar hulle sê die Here is die Here. And so that's my testimony for today. At 80 years old, I can still say that.